I'm Jess, and it's so great to be with you for a few moments today. Welcome to Kingston Standard Church, our online version. I'd love to invite you to connect with us online or in person. If you're in the Kingston area, come on out. We would love to see you. If you're limited to online connection though, not a problem. Just be sure to check out our website for at-home worship resources. But in the description box of this video, you're going to find the link to our website. As well, you can always follow us on YouTube and like us on Facebook, and be sure to subscribe to both so that you'll stay up to date on all the new content when it's posted. We have a variety of resources available to families and kids on both Facebook and YouTube, so if this is your first time joining us, or if you've been here before, we want to encourage you to go ahead and check that out, because our mission is to equip families for the conversations that they have together to learn and grow and follow Jesus. And if you want to touch base personally, then feel free to reach out. You can send us a message on Facebook, or you can use the address below. So let's dive in and see what we're going to learn about today.
A few years ago, there was a study done of seniors 80 plus years of age, and the question was asked, if you had an opportunity to do things in your life over again, is there anything that you would change? Now, of course, there were a number of answers all over the spectrum, but the most common answers that came back were these three. The first one was that I would take more risks in life. The second one was that I would give more thought to things, maybe do things a little bit more on purpose. And the last one seems to resonate probably with us the most, and that is that they would want to do more things that outlast their lives. Now, that's something we kind of all want in life, things that will ultimately outlast us. It's a conversation about legacy, isn't it? What will be left over when I am not? But too many of us kind of walk through life not really realizing the great influence opportunity that we've been given. And we often miss out on legacy moments, not because of a missed moment or a missed opportunity, but because of some of the daily habits that we have that overlook some of the places where we can have the most significant impact. And that's an impact that's available as people who follow Jesus in a very ordinary way, in ordinary circumstances, in every day. Now today we're looking at 2 Timothy. And 2 Timothy is actually the last letter that the Apostle Paul would write before he was killed in Rome. And he wrote this to encourage his personal protege, Timothy. Timothy was a young pastor serving in a very unique setting. And what Paul points out here in this particular passage and in some others is that Timothy's life has some very distinct marks of faith that got their start in the teaching and influence of his mother Eunice and his grandmother Lois. 2 Timothy chapter 1 verses 3 to 7 reads like this. Timothy, I thank God for you, the God I serve with a clear conscience, just as my ancestors did. Night and day, I constantly remember you in my prayers. I long to see you again, for I remember your tears as we parted, and I will be filled with joy when we are together again. I remember your genuine faith, for you share the faith that first filled your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I know that same faith continues strong in you. This is why I remind you to fan into flames the spiritual gift God gave you when I laid my hands on you. For God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline. Lois and Eunice, Timothy's grandmother and mother, both lived in the community of Lystra and are only named this once in Scripture. But these two had an influence far beyond their own lifetimes. We're going to dig around a little bit in a couple other passages so that we can fill out some details on Timothy's journey as well as who these two individuals were. Acts chapter 16 verses 1 through 5 read like this. Paul first went to Derbe and then on to Lystra. There was a young disciple there named Timothy, and his mother was a Jewish believer, and his father was a Greek. Timothy was well thought of by the believers in Lystra and in Iconium. So Paul wanted him to join them on their journey. In deference, though, to the Jews of the area, he arranged for Timothy to be circumcised before they left, for everyone knew that his father was a Greek. Well, then they went from town to town, instructing the believers to follow the decisions made by the apostles and elders in Jerusalem, so the churches were strengthened in their faith and grew larger every day. Well, then at the conclusion of his letter to Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 3, he says, "But you must remain faithful to the things you have been taught. You know they are true, for you know you can trust those who taught you. You have been taught the Holy Scriptures from childhood, and they have given you the wisdom to receive the salvation that comes from trusting in Christ Jesus. All Scripture is inspired by God and is useful to teach us what is true and what makes us realize what's wrong in our lives. It corrects us when we're wrong and teaches us to do what's right. God uses it to prepare and equip His people to do every good work." Now we gather a little bit more information in these passages about Eunice's life in these verses. She was a Jewish woman who was married to a Greek man. There are some scholars who think she may have been widowed. We're pretty sure Lois, who was Eunice's mother, had come to follow Jesus as well, and they might have even lived in the same house as they helped together with Timothy's upbringing. We know Lois was involved in Timothy's life because she was an active part of his heritage of faith, just like his mother. And as Paul points out, the teaching and influence of these two women paved the way for Timothy to come to understand faith and to begin to follow Jesus. Now their situation was far from ideal. They lived in Lystra, which was a military outpost. It would have been a very hardened town. It was known for its worship of many idols, and they were raising Timothy with a father who was at least absent from faith, and maybe altogether. Well, they lived in this community, and it had really no regard for their faith in Jesus. It could have even been considered hostile, because as people started to follow Jesus, we see in the book of Acts how easily the city was stirred up against Paul, and they ended up taking him out of town and threw stones at him, leaving him there for dead. So here are Lois and Eunice, two very ordinary people with very ordinary daily circumstances who were faithful in what seems like a very ordinary way. And now 2,000 years later, we know the names of these two ordinary women as they continue to be helpful to us, and maybe we can learn from them as well as anyone on the journey of what we might understand to be ordinary faithfulness in the hands of an extraordinary God. Now in their case, the influence and teaching that they had in Timothy's life were part of genuinely building his faith. This was a faith that stood out and garnered respect and influence in the wider community. It mentions in his own town in Lystra, but also in the community of Iconium. A faith that was mirroring the faith of his mother and his grandmother. A faith that opened doors for Timothy to become a part of Paul's ministry team. A faith that helped Timothy influence many people beyond the city of Lystra as they discovered what it meant to follow Jesus. A faith that continued to be a catalyst, helping others to discover faith in Jesus too. Over the years, I've worked with or spent a lot of time with some very specific people, and I find that when I do, that I end up kind of behaving and speaking and thinking a lot like they do. We kind of intuitively know this, and this is why we counsel people to choose their friends wisely. But there are times when there are things that are coming out of our mouths that we recognize that's a lot like that person that I spend a lot of time with. I've had that experience lately when I've been thinking about statements coming out of my mouth saying, that sounds a lot like my dad. Or actions that are a part of my life when I say, that's a lot like the pastor that I spent my first formative years in ministry with. We start to sound like them. We start to act like them. You maybe even get the "you remind me of them" kind of statement. What we're talking about is actually referred to as something called the ACHU principle. More is caught than is taught. It's kind of ironic considering where we are in this pandemic. But what are people catching from us becomes a question that is worth asking. So while we're thinking about what others are catching from us, it might be fair to say that we know we all want to live in a way that has some kind of lasting influence in their life. A healthy influence at that. But maybe over the next few minutes we could learn a little bit from Eunice and from Lois as to how their influence caught in Timothy's life. Maybe one of the things we could catch from them would be the fact that they were so consistent. The teaching of Timothy was not just something that was done just in a day. It was something that was done daily. Small, consistent investments over time. Investing in his teaching. And they were consistent in the way that they lived their life as well. And we've all had a number of times where we've watched people's lives, their words and their actions didn't quite line up, and it's resulted in problems for us. Ultimately, sometimes those individuals can overshadow so many of the consistent and trustworthy people that we've looked to in life. One of those people for me is my grandfather, Mackenzie. After my grandmother Mackenzie passed away, my grandfather would come alone to visit us, and he would stay overnight. He'd worked for quite a number of years up through his retirement without hearing protection in a very noisy environment. So that created my opportunity to sit outside of his bedroom and to listen to him pray. Now, he thought he was whispering, but he was whispering pretty loud. And I'd hear him pray for people. I'd hear him pray for me. And it was just like him in the way that he prayed. Not fancy prayers, just real. He was a great influence in my walk with Jesus. Just his steady, consistent life. But something else that we can catch from Eunice and from Lois is how intentional they were. We can appreciate that this whole teaching and the schedule and all of the things that were a part of Timothy's life, they just didn't happen by accident. They were good ideas to be able to teach him, but they had to happen on purpose. Their good intentions had to be followed through with action. Because the investment in Timothy and him turning out the way he did wasn't just because they were lucky. It wasn't just because they had all this time that magically appeared and said, here's the time that you can use to teach Timothy. It took planning. It took energy and time and attention to detail. It took follow through. It probably even cost them some money along the way as well. We all know that this is part of the process where plans in life have to move from dreams inside our heads to just some good intention to reality. A number of years ago, we had a conversation in our household about how we could allow our kids to experience international missions with us. So as our oldest was growing past 9 and into age 10 and 11, we're starting to ask questions like, this is a great idea, but how is this going to work? So we ask questions like everyone. Where will we go, and what are we going to do when we get there, and how will we finance this? What is our plan? What is our purpose? What do we hope to accomplish while we're there? This was very much an on-purpose journey for us, and it worked and worked until it worked out for the details to allow myself to take our kids each at age 14 on some kind of international missions experience together. Now, it was fun to see how their view of the world was changing and their courage and their vision was being expanded through this trip. I'm not sure if those moments would have just all of a sudden landed in their lap by accident. There was a significant amount of intention and follow-through that was necessary for us to be able to see those times occur. If we'd waited for the time and the money to just magically appear, it probably would have just stayed a good idea and good intentions, and maybe somewhere down the road, if we'd missed out, they'd have become regrets, things we wished we would have done. So when we think about people like Eunice and Lois investing in Timothy, we know they had to be intentional. They had to be purposeful in active participation in following through on their good intentions to see Timothy develop in faith. But we can also catch their humility. And humility is a bit of a catchword that sometimes it means a lot of different things. Different people define it different ways. But I looked it up in the dictionary, and this was one of the definitions that I really resonated with. Humility is an attitude of spiritual modesty that comes from understanding our place in the larger order of things. It entails not taking our desires, successes, or failings too seriously. Now, Eunice and Lois are an example of this kind of humility. They were understanding what it meant to lift others up beyond their own lifetime. They invested in Timothy because they understood that life was not all about them. And the order of life includes investments in those that are coming behind you. This kind of investment requires humility, to realize that we're here on this earth for a brief time, and people will truly be our legacy. Eunice and Lois are a picture of genuinely doing things that last. Now, I'm sure they had some ambitions of their own, some moments where they probably wished they could have done things more significantly in their own lives. But in God's larger order of life, they are incredibly significant in the training and the coaching and the developing of a strong spiritual foundation for Timothy to grow in faith and in leadership. So in humility, it seemed that they understood their job included to become shoulders that someone else can stand on. I wonder if they ever sat back and thought about the fact that eventually they would have a share in the impact of everybody that Timothy would in the future connect with for the sake of the gospel. Now, as a result of this pandemic, we understand contact tracing and what it means when we're dealing with spreading contact with people. So imagine if we could contact trace all the people that Timothy had connected with in his lifetime. And even beyond that, maybe even into the next generation, we could understand how that started with Eunice and Lois. Because sometimes in humility, investing in people might actually also mean that their impact could be wider and greater and maybe even more famous than yours. This is exactly what happened with Eunice and Lois. We know about Timothy, we know about his character and the places that he went with Paul. We know that his mom and grandma, though, were key players in the development of his faith in following Jesus. And even though they didn't control the impact, they did know they could control the investment. And as a result, Timothy stood on their shoulders everywhere he went. You know, all of us feel like we're just ordinary people. And that's why I love this account of Lois and Eunice. Because although they're not superstars, they have no major public persona, we can see how these two ordinary people in just everyday ordinary circumstances were faithful in a very ordinary way. And so like them, we need to make our choice and put ourselves in the hands of an extraordinary God to allow ourselves to be used as ordinary people. And we need to hear about people like Eunice and Lois because we need to know how God works in passing the baton of faith. It gives us an opportunity to ask, who will I allow to stand on my shoulders in their journey toward or in faith? But we also need to know this because sometimes in day-to-day life, it can just seem like things are just mundane. And it's hard to see the end goal when we're kind of in the middle of the journey, when they're in the middle of plugging along in daily life. And so we need reminders, encouragement, maybe even some people we can identify with to help us to see that as we follow Jesus like they did, that our lives can build consistent, intentional, and humility-driven influence. Influence that will yield an impact that can outlast us. As a matter of fact, as we put ourselves in the hands of an extraordinary God, it may not be something that we even get a chance to see or understand completely in our own lifetime. Because just like Lois and Eunice, we don't control the impact, but we do have an opportunity to control our investment. So imagine for just a few moments what could be possible by faith as you see each day as a purposeful opportunity to invest in someone else's faith journey. Maybe some of your friends, your neighbors, your family. Maybe we could daily ask God, with His help, God, who could I allow to stand on my shoulders in their journey of faith?
Thanks again for joining us today. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channels, or if you're watching this on Facebook, then you can like and follow us there. And it would mean so much to us if you took a moment to comment, like, and share this video so that others are able to enjoy it as well. And hey, if you're in the Kingston area, come on out. We would love to see you. Please know though that you are loved and that we're praying for you. And we certainly appreciate your prayers too. We'll see you soon.